Hello everyone and welcome back to Icebane Gaming. Today I have another art time lapse. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I once again, in classic Icebane fashion, forgot to do a recording for the early rough lines for the Wendigo. This Wendigo I was making for my girlfriend, and well, let's hit play. Alright, so I started by trying to fix up some of the fur that I had on the shoulder of the Wendigo and add a little bit more fuzz to it before I was going to do the environment around it. The first thing that I did in the environment was the corpse that the Wendigo is looming over the person that he's eating. And, well, I decided who better for the corpse than Santa, because I'm a little bit of a dark soul like that, you know? I marked that as snow so I remember later, because otherwise it's just a big blob, and then little footprints in the snow there. I did a lot of line cleanup around here to make sure that everything looked nice and clean. I make sure that the lines are following a consistent pattern, whatever that means. Either way, here I start the actual line flats. I use vector lines these days. I made sure to make it all look nice and clean, and a lot of what I do with the vector lines is I try to interpret what I've done with my sloppy roughs to make things look nice and smooth. It's questionable on whether or not this would have looked better with really rough lines, but at the same time, I decided to do this, so that's what I did this time. Might, for my grotesque style, choose to keep some sloppy lines in the future, but for now, I think that this looks nice. Here I go, making the fur all closed off from the outside area, and here I do the fur for the inside of the body of the Wendigo. And I didn't connect the lines on the inside of the body because I was figuring I would just do some cleanup on the flats later. Here I do the hands. Nice, plain and simple. I realize that my lines look a little bit jank on that hand, so I make them look half decent, and then I stop messing with them. Here I doing some line cleanup, making sure that they all match up, using control points, and I move on to the skull. I had to interpret what I did for the teeth in the skull with vector lines, slightly different than how they looked already. I chose to give the Wendigo 6 eyes because I thought that would be a fun little thing for it. I don't know if Wendigos have a set amount of eyes, but I decided this one would have 6. Antlers are something that I don't draw too often, so this was a first for me. Between the roughs and the blood that I wanted to have in the finished project, I decided to make it look a little bit more goopy and have a natural flow to it in the final version of the blood. Of course, I'm going to recolor the blood, but I wanted it to be all stringy and present wherever it would be. Little drips and strands because blood tends to coagulate. Here I do the line flats for Santa. Rest in peace, Santy. Here I start doing his collar. I wanted to make it look a little bit more fluffy than I had initially. I should also mention that between me finishing Santa and doing the line flats for the Wendigo, about a month had passed. I got really busy during the month of January, so I just didn't do much with it. As you could see, there was that messed up line on Santa's leg. I do clean it up later, but yeah, here I start thinking. I spend quite a bit of time thinking at this point of what I'm going to do next, and I believe what I do next is some flat colors. Yep, there we go. A neutral blue, because a lot of the Wendigo is working in brown tones. And I do a little bit of color cleanup whenever I do a color drop fill. I chose to make the eyes white here temporarily, but that's to change. And I didn't even settle on that white in the end. These are temporary colors for the time being. Here I go cleaning up all of the empty space for the fur, and give it a little bit more of a strandy feel whenever there's a gap. I always feel like it looks more like natural fur when I do that. I don't think I did that much texturing work in this project, but I did go and shade it all later. A lot of cleanup spots to fill, and underneath the fur around the chest, I ended up making another layer so that I could color underneath. I'm using Clip Studio Paint in these. It's my primary art program of choice these days. So it doesn't have the draw under tool, at least not to my knowledge, like Photoshop does. The reason I switched to Clip was because when I did switch, that was when Clip wasn't doing a subscription-based feature. Here I go trying to decide what type of white I wanted to have the skull. I decided to go with a more bleached tone. Here I go starting to do the line colors. It's done by putting a filter layer over the line layer, and then coloring the filter. That way I could have everything look nice and pretty. I chose to make the lines very close to the original colors for this one because I figured a lot of the texture would come from shading. And it made it end up feeling like a bit more of an artistic approach. It made it feel like it was a bit more artistic feeling than it would have been before. I decided to use black for the fur lines because, well, normally I try to avoid using black as a color because it doesn't occur much naturally, but for the stylized feel, I decided to make that really pop more than the brighter line tones for the rest of the Wendigo. Finishing up with the hooves. And then I do a little bit of blood cleanup, because the blood in this project, I didn't really think much about how it was going to mix with the lines, so I had to do a little bit more for it. I also added a little bit of extra blood into it to make it have a little bit more goop to it than it did before. Added a few strands in the hand, as if it was closing its fingers and pulling them apart. Kind of like when you open your lips when they're covered in saliva and there's a little string when you're looking in the mirror or whatever. I realized I forgot to do the colors for the arm. And around this point, in case you didn't notice, I decided to go with pink blood. A lot like Danganronpa, that murder mystery game. And I chose to go with a nice cherry red for Santa so that he could have like that Coca-Cola outfit feel, because that's what he ended up becoming during like the 50s or whatever. Back when they decided that Santa wore red and white instead of brown and green sort of things, like he did back in the day when he was still a pagan holiday tradition. I decided to go with a very close to white tone for the fuzz around the fluff. Here I start the rocks, and I add snow on top, and I decide, you know what, I'm gonna do the snow in a painty fashion. I start with the shades first. So I do the darkest tones that I was choosing to do for the snow initially. I add a little bit of shadow there for the hoof that I wouldn't really touch with much. And then I start thinking about how I want to do this. I decided to add the highlights to the rock and stuff first so that I'd be able to see when I was working on the snow in the background. I used a glitter spray brush so that I could make the snow have a little bit of sparkle. And I also end up using a twinkle brush as well to add bigger sparkles that are a bit more akin to what you would see in a snowy field in like Minnesota, where I'm from. Here I was deciding on how I wanted to do the trees. I ended up choosing to go with the brush I normally use. And here is a tree in the style that I started adopting more lately, doing more wispy, long and free-form limbs for the tree. It makes the branches feel more realistic because the tree doesn't think about how it looks. It's just going to branch out as it would. Here I do some trees in the background at different tones. All of these seem like they're really dark because I was trying to do that, but then when I added the black for the sky, they all seemed to look brighter than they were. I decided to end up doing a world tree sort of thing in the background as well. This is way off in the distance, and I have to add a lot more limbs to the world tree than I do for the little ones so that it looks a bit more like a tree. Here I was trying to decide how I was going to do the shadows, and I decided to start with the light brown ones initially. Do this to make it blue, and then I do a vertical flip, and then clean up the shadow for the area that we didn't see before. And then I faded it to the foreground. And then I added the brightness of the snow, and then did a little bit of shadow for his leg, because obviously a Wendigo is going to cast a shadow. And then I added the glitter sort of effect to all of the snow around. And there's always, even in the shadows at night, a little bit of a sparkle to areas in the snow, because it's reflecting off of various different surfaces. Like, it could reflect off of other particles of snow. And it always has that little glitter feel to it. Added more trees in the background because it's a forest after all. And then I added the moon. And I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do the glow effect. So it's a little bit jittery around here, where I was trying to figure out what I was doing. And I ultimately ended up deciding on a small halo like that just goes over things a little bit. Tried adding some texture to the moon. I was having a hard time figuring out how I wanted to do it, but ended up just settling on what I did. Here's some pink blood in the snow. Make Santa look like he bled a little bit. I changed the color of the pink to a little bit more of a hot pink. I will change it again to make it an even hotter pink later on. Then I added some shadows to these rocks. Here are my thoughts for clouds. I started with the stars and then did a little bit more glitter effect on the ground before I got back to clouds. And I ended up choosing this brush because it made it feel like there was a bit of layers to the clouds either way. And yeah, it just took a little bit of finicking to get it to look the way I wanted it to. If I was to do one thing different, I would have added like mountains in the background, but hindsight 2020. And yeah, here's the fog. And I was trying to decide what I was going to do next. I think that next thing I do is starting shading. Okay, and I decided to do a bit of a pink accent halo. You'll see me do it in a second here, and finish deciding, and I was trying to decide how I wanted it to work. Initially, I did it with just the background, and then I started copy pasting it to the layers in the foreground. This adds a bit of contrast from the blue, kind of vaporwave colors, all in all. And then I started doing the actual shading. Most of the shading is going to cover up most of the characters. It's mostly backlit. How many more times can I say mostly? And I decided to add a little bit more shadow to Santa. And then I added the shadows for the Wendigo. And there we are. Mostly just accents. Pretty quick shading here. Then I added a little bit for the horns so that they pop out a bit. And then I added a darker shadow on top to add a little bit more contrast. Then I made the eyes glow, and I believe the program is about to crash here in just a moment, and then I'm going to be reset to the point at which I started saying that. There we go, the Clip Studio crash. And then I redid the eyes, made them a little brighter. Really pops out right there. And I started deciding what I wanted to do next. There was like only a couple things left I wanted to do, and I decided to mute colors for part of the shadows, make things look a little bit more contrast. Then I added a little texture to Santa's hair. I could have added some texture to the Wendigo, but I decided, you know what, I'm done. And I did my signature right there. And the last time I changed the blood color is right about here, and then I saved it. There we go. That's it. And this was the Wendigo for a commission, and as you can see, the little blood drips. Pretty fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do for more art time lapses, and there will be a AI video coming soon. Keep an eye out for that, and have a good one.